Hey everybody, I'm here to talk about my book reviews for August, and honestly, August was not the best reading month for me. I'm a teacher and school has started back up this month, and while I'm extremely fortunate to have a district that's decided to start virtually, it's very tough to basically relearn everything that I do since I'm an art teacher. And if you're a parent out there, thank you for all the hard work that you've been doing to work with us. I know it's stressful for everybody, but hopefully things can get back to normal super soon. But because of school coming back up, I haven't had a lot of time to read as much as I had during summer vacation. And with the time that I did have, a lot of my books were duds this month, unfortunately. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about that. The first book that I read this month was actually the favorite of the month, and this is one that I started back in July when I was doing the reading rush, but I didn't end up finishing it then, so I finished it at the beginning of August, and that was The Lost City of Z. So this is an adventure story based on a true story, and it's centered around Percy Fawcett, who was an English explorer back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And he was obsessed with the Amazon and trying to find what he called the Lost City of Z, which was essentially, you could pair it up with El Dorado. And he spent decades of his life taking various trips to the Amazon to try and find this city. And then eventually, in around 1925, he went there for his final journey with his son, and their party went missing in action, and no one had ever been able to find out what happened to them. Obviously, they probably died in the jungle, but no one had ever recovered any evidence that suggested how that happened. So we flip between several perspectives. We have the perspective of the author, who is making his own journey to the Amazon to try and uncover things. We have kind of a fiction style, historical fiction style telling of Percy Fawcett when he took his journeys to the Amazon. And then we also get some fiction style tellings of explorers that came after Percy Fawcett trying to find him. So I really liked how we flipped between all these different things. It kept the story extremely interesting, and I think that this book did a really good job explaining the culture of the tribes in the Amazon, not trying to exoticize them in any way. And this book also has really good research. It tells you a lot of factual information about not only the Amazon, but all the several journeys that took place in this book. If you like adventure stories, this one is really good. Oh, and my rating for Lost City of Z is 5 out of 5. My next book is one that's really well known, and I did get this recommendation from someone in my real life and thought I could trust them, but I really ended up not liking this one, and that is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I'm not going to go too much into the plot because I only got 130 pages into this book before I gave up. But it is a high fantasy story that takes place over a lot of books. I think there's at least 15 books in this series. So I've been meaning to read it for actually years and only just now decided this is the time. So I'll go into why I decided to give up on this one. I think a huge fault of this book, at least from what I read, was that even though it's very long, it's about 650 pages, this book has way too much description. And I know that it's a thing that some people just hate to read that. I actually don't mind, but it has to be purposeful. I feel like sometimes descriptions were just repeating things that we already knew, or it would describe several places that were actually really, really similar, and it didn't need to be reiterated constantly. So I feel like even though this is a really long series, really long books, probably a lot of it could have been pared down. The other thing I noticed right away is a lot of these characters are very cliche, and even the story is. I read Lord of the Rings this summer, and there were some shocking parallels between the very beginning of this book and the beginning of Lord of the Rings. So both take place in like a small town, so like Hobbiton in the Shire. They both have a festival or a big party coming up. They both have a mysterious stranger coming to bring party favors and fireworks. And they both have dark riders dressed in black on black horses. Like, it's uncanny how similar the beginning of this was to Lord of the Rings. Like, does anybody else call this out? It's crazy. And going back to the cliche characters, The dialogue in here, especially between the young teenage boy characters, is so cringy. Like, I could tell that the author was trying to make the character Matt funny, but every time he cracked a joke, it made me roll my eyes because it was just, they were so corny and I hated it. So with me noticing that many things that I didn't like already in 130 pages of book one, I basically decided I need to write this one off as one that I'm not gonna like. I'm not gonna give this book a rating just because I'm gonna be respectful to the fact that this is a well-loved author and a really well-loved series, so no rating, but take what you will from my review. If you don't like the kinds of things I just described, I wouldn't read it. Fortunately, my next book is one that I actually loved, and last month for the reading rush, I read James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl and decided to check out more of his books because when I was a kid, I just didn't get into him, I guess. And this is another really well-loved one, Matilda. I had never read it, and I'd actually never seen the movie, even though it's definitely from my time. So I went ahead and watched that too. I loved it. But Matilda is about a young girl. She's about 6 years old, and she's going to school for the first time. And she's in a family where her parents don't really pay a lot of attention to her, and they don't listen to her. And I mean, she's kind of like a super genius, but they don't give her the time of day and don't realize the strengths and eccentricities that Matilda has until she goes to school and she meets her teacher, Miss Honey, who realizes all the potential that Matilda has. And there's a lot of other funny, silly things that happen in the book, but that's the gist of it. What I loved about this book, it's the complete opposite of the Eye of the World characters. Every character in here, no matter how short of a time that they appeared, is characterized well and uniquely. And what Roald Dahl does really well is he doesn't tell you this is how this person is. You get a feeling of how they are because of how they talk or what they're doing, their actions, and that's just a sign of good writing. He's a great author. And even though this book is for little kids, me as an adult, I really enjoyed it. It also helps that I'm now a teacher, so I can appreciate that aspect of, you know, teacher finding the special things about a student. It was a heartwarming story. I gave this one 5 out of 5, and I recommend it to you no matter what your age is. I have a lot to say about my next book, and this is probably one, if it weren't for the fact that I am determined to finish this series, I probably would not have read, but I finished it, all 620 some pages of it, and that is Blackwood Farm by Anne Rice. So introducing this book kind of requires a lot of backstory because it's number 9 in the Vampire Chronicles series by Anne Rice. I don't want to go into all that because I plan on making a video all about the series at some point when I finish reading them all, but suffice to say, Quinn is our main character, and over time he has been haunted by a ghost or spirit, he's not sure which, who essentially looks like his twin. And the spirit is named Goblin. Yes, you heard that right. Lestat, who is a main character all throughout the Vampire Chronicles series, meets up with Quinn, and Quinn ends up telling Lestat his whole life story, how Goblin came to start haunting him up until the present day. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you now, I give this a 1 out of 5. And again, since it's number 9 in a series, I don't feel bad about spoiling this entire book for you right now. If you don't want to hear spoilers, skip forward till you see the next book up on the screen, but I'm going to get into it on this one because it was so awful. Okay, so the first thing that's not great about this book, it suffers from something that a lot of the Vampire Chronicles books suffer from, which is Anne Rice got caught into this thing where she likes the story to be as if it's being narrated by a character. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but basically the front 30 pages are Quinn and Lestat having a chat, and then the vast majority of this book is Quinn telling Lestat the story of his life. And then the last 30 pages, we're back to the present time where the actual plot is. Yes. So 30 pages in the front, 30 pages in the back. There's your plot for the Vampire Chronicles. The rest of this is just Quinn's life story. And I gotta be honest, Quinn sucks. I don't like him as a character. Even though we know everything about him, including the number of times he goes to the Cracker Barrel, I still don't care about him. And that's really unfortunate. The other thing that super bothers me about this book is she chose to make it part of the Vampire Chronicles series, but there's hardly vampires in this story, number one. Number two, most of those books take place around characters that are already in the series. Quinn is a new character that has never shown up before. So we already have probably over 50 vampires that we know a lot about that book number 9 could have been about, but for some reason she chose to put in this random character, Quinn. Another complaint about this book is just way too long. It's similar to The Eye of the World. It describes things in way too much detail that we really don't need to know. Where The Eye of the World kind of repeated the same descriptions over and over, this just gives you way too much, like things that aren't important to the story and you're never going to think twice about again. But if that's the case, in my opinion, if you're a good writer, you cut that stuff out. You don't need it. You also might notice that I did mark one place in this book. And that's because something happened so strange that I had to mark it so I would remember to talk about it. And essentially, Quinn and Lestat are going and talking to Quinn's Aunt Queen. And they're having a nice little chat with her. She's an older lady. And for some reason, when they say goodnight to her and they leave her bedroom, Quinn is compelled to fall on the ground and kiss her foot in her stocking feet and high heels. And nobody seems to think this is strange. Lestat kind of chuckles to himself, and Aunt Queen doesn't even remark on it at all. And I just thought, why is this character doing this? This is another classic Anne Rice thing. The characters sometimes do these actions that are so bizarre, but it doesn't get addressed. And you just think, am I the weird one here? Does everyone kiss their aunt's feet? I don't know. I don't get it. This one also has another classic Anne Rice book trope. I'm going to call it that, which is every character loves every character. There's too much love, okay? There's never a character in these books that somebody dislikes. They love them no matter how horrible, moody, and selfish they are. Everyone loves everyone. And I'm talking insta-love, like, hi, how are you? I love you so much. Another fault to this book is the language that the characters use. In the original Vampire Chronicles books, I'm going to say like the first two, it's really charming because the characters are characters that have been alive since some of them like the 1600s. So they kind of have an old, archaic way of speaking that's very flowery, and it fits. But in here, Quinn is in his 20s in almost present day. I think this is supposed to be in like maybe 2000, 2005 time period. But he talks like a vampire who's been alive for hundreds of years. And it's just not realistic. Like, why would this young guy talks in this super flowery language? I just don't like it. Every character has the same voice, and therefore they all mesh together. If all of that wasn't enough for you to consider never reading this in your life, I will go ahead and tell you the plot. So like I told you, the beginning is Quinn meeting up with Lestat, who is a favorite character of the series, and they are both vampires at that point in time. Then Quinn is coming to Lestat and saying, I have the spirit goblin, he harasses me, he's taking blood from me now that I'm a vampire, and he haunts me and I don't know what to do. I need your help. So Lestat says, okay, tell me how Goblin came to be about. And this could be over and done really quick, but the majority of this book is telling the life story from the day Quinn is born to present day. All of it, even stuff you don't want to hear. So in the beginning, Quinn has his earliest memories remembering that Goblin is always there. And sometimes he even has flashbacks of being like a toddler and playing with Goblin. And in the beginning of his life, everyone in his family thinks that he's crazy or he has an imaginary friend. And as he gets older and older in his childhood, he continues to reference Goblin and talk about doing things with Goblin way too long. And his family starts thinking, well, maybe we need to get him checked out by a psychologist or psychiatrist, whatever. And so they do that. And they determine that nothing's really wrong with him. Well, maybe he just has a fixation on an imaginary friend. But as the story unfolds, you find out that the family already knows that people in the family are predisposed to seeing ghosts and things like that. And you find out eventually at the very end that apparently when Quinn was born, he had a twin brother, and the twin brother died maybe a couple days after birth. But no one in his family told him that. So basically you find out that Goblin is the ghost of the dead twin brother, which explains why Goblin has always looked like his twin, okay? And in the very end, the last 30 or so pages that take place back in present day, they find a witch that was in one of the other books, Merrick, and she comes and exorcises Goblin, and that's the end of the story. Things that were ridiculous that happened in this book. Okay, there's insta-love, if you don't like that trope. Quinn is at the hospital getting some tests done, and he sees this young girl in the hospital restaurant, looks at her for 2 seconds, and immediately is in love with her and demands to marry her on the spot. And a lot of this story then devolves into the relationship of these two. And I mean, this book really suffers because the plot is only in like 10% of this book, and the rest is just this rambling, long life, boring story. I mean, we could have just said, Goblins haunted me since my childhood, and, you know, we didn't have to hear all this, and it wasn't very exciting. So, yeah. Spoilers a lot bit, but like I said, do yourself a favor. Don't read this book. So when I told you that I had a bad reading month, I really meant it. And I didn't like the last book I read this month either. I wouldn't have finished it if it not had been a pick for a book club that I'm in, so I really wanted to read it for that purpose, but I don't recommend this one. So I have a list here to tell you of all the things that I had a problem with in this book. Did I even tell you the title? The book is The Night Swim by Megan Golden. So the premise of this could have been good. A podcaster travels to a small town so that she can cover the trial of a rape case that's ongoing. And while she's there, she starts to receive these mysterious letters from an anonymous person that is begging her to investigate the death/murder of her sister, which happened decades earlier and in the same town. So it's been a while since I've read a thriller, and I'd say most of them I think are mediocre or worse, and a few I've really enjoyed. But I think this one just missed the mark, and unfortunately I think it's because of poor writing. Like, the story wasn't awful, but the writing was not great, and I'll go ahead and tell you what I noticed about this one. So this is not about the writing, but it's just something weird that I remarked upon, and that is that sometimes throughout the book, the author would write things in a certain way that was just kind of off. Like, she was always talking about people sitting in plastic bucket seats, and I didn't know what those were. And things like people talking about going to the supermarket. For some reason, a lot of characters were always going to the supermarket in this book. But I was thinking about it, and I'm like, I don't know anybody who says, I'm going to the supermarket. We say, I'm going to the store, or I'm going to the grocery store. And another thing that I noticed is that anytime someone was eating, I would say the majority of the time they were eating a hamburger and fries. That's it. It would be like, this person was hungry, they ate a hamburger and fries. This person ordered room service, it was a hamburger and fries. And I'm like, I don't think this person's actually from the United States. I think they're from somewhere else trying to write about us. And so I looked the author up, and sure enough, she's from Australia. So I just want to say, Megan Golden, we eat things other than hamburger and fries. I know it's hard to believe, but yeah. Now on to the actual, writing complaints. So this book is the opposite of Roald Dahl's Matilda. I said about that book that he's really good at showing you, not telling. This book is really good at telling you and not letting you think for yourself or showing you what's happening. And in particular, there's one extremely clumsy metaphor that I saw coming from a mile away, because I don't want to spoil this book in case you were looking forward to read it. It's very new, but a certain thing kept coming up in the story, and I was thinking, why do they keep mentioning this? It has nothing to do with anything, and then turns out it was just there to provide a very clumsy metaphor, but you'll see if you read it. In terms of the mystery girl who wants to solve the decades-old murder of her sister, the way that she goes about doing this is giving these letters anonymously to the podcast host while she's in town for the trial. So she'll like find one on her windshield, find one on her bed in her hotel, and I just couldn't help thinking, if all this girl wants is for the murder of her sister to be solved, why would she keep her identity a mystery? Why would she piecemeal information in the form of creepy letters instead of just, meeting her and giving her all the information she would need to solve this case? Because essentially the sister had died and it wasn't classified as a murder at all. It was classified as like an accidental death. Also, when our main character is interviewing people around the town trying to figure out what's happened for either case, nobody has any opposition. Like, there's no characters who are like, get out of my face, get out of my business. Nobody says, I'm not going to help you. It's like she says, hey, how are you? And they start going into their life story and giving her every ounce of information that she could want. So the characters were not believable. Speaking of characters, our main character has absolutely no personality. We also get next to no information about her backstory. What I was able to pick up from the little piecemeal tiny things that we were given was, at some point she was married and divorced, doesn't tell us any more than that, and that she used to be an investigative journalist before she hosted the podcast. And we don't really even know her age. I would guess she's probably around 30 years old. Just like that clumsy metaphor I saw coming, I saw every twist coming in this book from 5 miles away because there was too much obvious hint dropping. And my last complaint, which I know not everybody is going to agree with me, was this book and the tone of it really reminded me of the book A Little Life, which has been making its rounds around BookTube. And I read that last year, and I did not like that book at all. And I think this book has the same problem, being that these books both punch you in the face with the negative aspects of life, but it's so overkill and unrealistic and poorly done. I know that a lot of people are emotionally affected by A Little Life. I know this review is not about that book, but like I said, it's overkill and it's unrealistic. There's a tasteful way to talk about tragedies and have a sad book. I really don't mind sad books at all, or books with sad endings, but it has to be well done. And when it's just like in your face, without any art to it, that's where it fails for me. So this one I gave a 2 out of 5, and that's mostly because I didn't have the heart to give another 1 out of 5 this month. If you sat through all of this very, very negative monthly book review, I thank you so much. I want to try to start making a video a week, I think. It'll help me kind of get my mind off of all my school stress that I've been having lately. And what I'm asking is that hopefully you can leave something down below if you're a subscriber of mine, or even if you're not, some videos that you would suggest or want to see from me, because I'm pretty much down for anything. So let me know in the comments, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. I'd like to see you in my next video. Bye!